Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Shattered. Blake Morrison had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years in private security, starting as military police, and working his way up to running executive protection for Fortune 500 CEOs had taught him to spot deception from across a room. Micro-expressions, body language, vocal patterns. He'd built a career on noticing what others missed, which made it all the more devastating that he'd been blind to what was happening in his own home. Saturday evening started like any other. Blake sat in his leather recliner, reviewing security assessments for a client's upcoming overseas trip. The house was quiet. Diana was at her book club, and their 8-year-old son Tyler was spending the night at Uncle Mike's house, as he'd done dozens of times before. Mike Torres wasn't actually Tyler's uncle, but he'd been Blake's partner at the security firm for 6 years before starting his own consulting business. More importantly, he'd been Blake's best friend since they met in basic training 15 years ago. Mike was Tyler's godfather, the guy who taught him to throw a football, the one who never missed a birthday party. Blake trusted Mike with his life. He'd literally done so on 3 different occasions during overseas assignments. The front door opened at 8:47 p.m. Blake glanced up from his laptop, expecting to see Diana returning early from book club with some neighborhood gossip. Instead, Tyler appeared in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the porch light. "Hey, buddy," Blake said, closing the laptop. "You're home early. Everything okay?" Tyler's face was pale, his usual animated demeanor replaced by something Blake had never seen before, a hollow, adult worry that didn't belong on a child's face. "Dad, Tyler's voice cracked. He clutched his overnight bag against his chest like a shield. Blake stood, his paternal instincts overriding his professional calm. "What's wrong?" "My friend said something to me." Tyler's eyes darted toward the living room. "He said I must never tell you what I saw." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Blake knelt to Tyler's eye level, his voice gentle but firm. "What friend? What did you see?" Tyler trembled, pointing toward the living room where family photos lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. All the moments that made up their supposedly perfect life. "It's right there, Dad. In the picture from Uncle Mike's pool party last month." Blake followed Tyler's finger to a framed photo Diana had placed there just weeks ago. It showed the whole family at Mike's backyard barbecue. Diana in her red sundress, Blake grilling burgers, Tyler splashing in the pool. But Tyler was pointing at something specific in the background. Before Blake could examine it closer, the garage door rumbled open. Diana's BMW pulled into the driveway. Tyler flinched at the sound. "She's home." "Tyler, what exactly did your friend tell you?" He said. Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said grown-ups have secrets that can break families apart, and that some secrets are worth keeping even if they hurt." Diana's heels clicked across the kitchen floor. "Blake? Tyler? What are you doing home, sweetie?" Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd interrogated enough people to recognize evasion, and Tyler was protecting someone. The question was who? Diana appeared in the doorway, her book club outfit immaculate, her smile bright and practiced. "Tyler, honey, why didn't you call for a ride?" "I wanted to walk," Tyler mumbled. Blake studied his wife's face, applying the same analytical skills he used on hostile witnesses. Her pupils were slightly dilated. Her breathing was elevated. Her left hand was fidgeting with her wedding ring, a tell he'd never noticed before, but now seemed blindingly obvious. "How was book club?" Blake asked, his tone casual. "Oh, you know how it is. Linda went on forever about some romance novel. I left early." Diana's laugh sounded forced. "I'm exhausted. Think I'll take a bath and turn in early." She kissed Blake's cheek, her perfume carrying an unfamiliar scent underneath, something masculine and woodsy, something that reminded him of Mike's cologne. As Diana headed upstairs, Blake turned back to Tyler. "Show me what you saw in the picture." Tyler approached the photo hesitantly. His small finger pointed to the background, where Blake could now see something he'd missed before, a window into Mike's house, and two figures embracing inside. "Tyler," Blake said carefully, "when did you take this picture?" "I didn't. Mom did. She said she was getting a good shot of you cooking." Tyler's voice was barely audible, "But I think she was taking a picture of something else." Blake lifted the frame, studying the image more closely. In the window's reflection, he could make out Diana's distinctive red dress and a man's silhouette. A man who was definitely not Blake, because Blake was clearly visible at the grill in the foreground. "Dad," Tyler's voice was small. "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" Blake set the photo down, his hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. 20 years of marriage, 8 years of fatherhood, 6 years of friendship and professional partnership, all of it built on lies. "Go get ready for bed, buddy," Blake said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Everything's going to be okay." Tyler nodded and headed upstairs, leaving Blake alone with the photograph and the sound of running water from Diana's bath. Blake Morrison had spent his career protecting other people's secrets. Now he was about to uncover his own family's betrayals, and he had no intention of protecting anyone. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. Blake waited until Diana's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep before slipping out of bed. It was 2:17 a.m., and years of military training had taught him to move silently through the house. He made his way to his home office, a converted bedroom that Diana rarely entered. From a locked drawer in his desk, Blake retrieved tools of his trade: digital recording devices, GPS trackers, and a laptop loaded with surveillance software that wasn't exactly legal for civilian use. But Blake had learned long ago that the line between legal and necessary was often drawn by people who'd never had their world imploded. He started with Diana's phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. Her passcode was Tyler's birthday, a detail that now felt like another small betrayal. Blake connected a data extraction device, downloading her text messages, call logs, and photos. What he found made his jaw clench. The messages went back 4 months. Pet names, meeting times, explicit photos. But it wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic deconstruction of everything Blake held sacred. "Mike, Blake suspects nothing. He actually thanked me for watching Tyler so much lately. Diana, I feel terrible about using Tyler like this, but he loves his sleepovers with Uncle Mike. Mike, the kid's a good cover. Blake would never question family time. Diana, after the Henderson job wraps up, we should tell him. I can't keep living this lie. Mike, let's wait until he's more settled. Maybe after his contract renewal." Blake's hands remained steady as he screenshotted everything, but inside, a cold fury was building. They weren't just betraying him. They were using his son as a prop in their deception. But the deeper Blake dug, the more disturbing the truth became. This wasn't a simple affair born of passion or midlife crisis. Diana and Mike had been systematically planning their future together, and that future didn't include Blake coming out unscathed. "Diana, the house is in both our names, but the security business is all his. We need to be careful about how we handle the split. Mike, I've been copying client files to my personal drive. If he tries to freeze me out, I'll have leverage. Diana, you're talking about stealing for your best friend. Mike, I'm talking about survival. Blake doesn't forgive betrayal. When he finds out, he'll try to destroy us both." Blake leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing at his lips. Mike knew him well enough to be afraid. That was smart. Blake Morrison didn't just burn bridges. He salted the earth beneath them. He moved to Diana's laptop next, breaking her password in under 10 minutes. Her browser history revealed regular visits to divorce attorney websites, real estate listings, and private schools in other states. She'd been planning her exit strategy for months. But the most damning evidence came from her cloud storage. Videos, taken surreptitiously during Blake's business trips. Diana and Mike in Blake's bed, in his home office, even in Tyler's playroom after the boy was asleep. They hadn't just betrayed him. They'd desecrated every space he considered sacred. Blake copied everything to an encrypted drive, then returned Diana's devices to their original locations. As he climbed back into bed, Diana stirred beside him. "Everything okay?" she mumbled. "Just couldn't sleep," Blake replied, pulling her close. She settled against his chest, her wedding ring cold against his skin. Blake stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning. By the time Diana's alarm went off, he'd already decided on his course of action. Diana and Mike wanted to play games with his life. He'd show them what a real game looked like. Over breakfast, Blake was the picture of a devoted husband and father. He made Tyler's lunch, kissed Diana goodbye, and reminded her about the parent-teacher conference schedule for the following week. "I love you," Diana said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "I love you too," Blake replied, and meant it. That was what made their betrayal so unforgivable. After dropping Tyler at school, Blake drove to his office. Morrison Security occupied the top floor of a downtown office building, with bulletproof windows and military-grade security systems. Blake's employees were all former military or law enforcement, people who understood loyalty and discretion. His assistant, Carmen Rodriguez, had been with him for 5 years. She was a former DEA agent who'd left the agency after a shooting that ended her field career. Carmen was also one of the few people who knew Blake's real history, not just the sanitized version he told clients. "Morning, boss," Carmen said as Blake entered. "Mike called earlier. Wants to meet for lunch to discuss the Peterson contract." Blake paused at his office door. "Did he specify a location?" "Said he'd text you." Sounded eager to talk. Blake nodded and closed his office door. "Mike wanted to discuss business?" "Perfect." Blake had some business of his own to address. He spent the morning reviewing Mike's access to company systems, client files, and financial records. As a partner, Mike had extensive privileges that Blake began systematically revoking. By noon, Mike's access was limited to basic email and scheduling. Mike's text arrived at 12:15. "Lunch at Rosario's? 1 p.m. Need to discuss some opportunities." Blake responded, "See you there." Rosario's was an upscale Italian restaurant where Blake and Mike had celebrated numerous business successes. Today, it would mark the beginning of Mike's destruction. Blake arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances. When Mike walked in, Blake studied his former friend with new eyes. Mike Torres was everything Blake wasn't. Charming where Blake was direct, smooth where Blake was intense. Women gravitated toward Mike's easy smile and quick wit, including, apparently, Blake's wife. "Blake." Mike's greeting was enthusiastic, his handshake firm. "Thanks for making time. I know you're swamped with the Henderson job." "Always have time for my partner," Blake replied, gesturing for Mike to sit. They ordered drinks, bourbon for Blake, wine for Mike. As they waited for their food, Mike launched into his pitch. "I've been thinking about expansion," Mike said. "Corporate consulting is booming, especially in cybersecurity. I've got a lead on a major contract with Meridian Industries." Blake sipped his bourbon, letting Mike talk. Meridian Industries was one of Blake's largest clients, a multinational corporation with executives who required constant protection. "The thing is," Mike continued, "they specifically requested someone from our team. Apparently, they've heard good things about our work." Blake set down his glass. "Which team member?" "Well, that's the interesting part. They want someone with field experience, but also someone who can blend in at corporate events. Someone like me." Blake almost laughed. Mike was pitching him on stealing his own client. "That's a conflict of interest," Blake said. "Meridian has an exclusive contract with Morrison Security." Mike's expression didn't change, but Blake caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I was thinking more of a subcontract arrangement. Keep it in the family." "The family," Blake repeated slowly. "Interesting choice of words. You know what I mean? We're brothers, Blake. Everything I have, I owe to you." Blake leaned back in his chair. "Everything, absolutely. The business, the connections, the opportunities. Hell, even meeting Diana. If you hadn't introduced us at that company barbecue." Mike stopped mid-sentence, realizing his mistake. Blake's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes made Mike's blood run cold. "Actually," Blake said quietly, "I think we should discuss a different kind of partnership dissolution." Mike's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. "Blake, I don't know what you think you know." "I know everything," Blake interrupted. "The question is what you're going to do about it." The restaurant noise faded into background static as the two men stared at each other across the table. Mike Torres had just realized he was no longer dining with his friend and business partner. He was sitting across from his executioner. Chapter 3. Gathering Allies. Blake's calmness unnerved Mike more than shouting would have. After 30 seconds of silence, Mike attempted damage control. "Blake, listen." "No." Blake's voice carried the quiet authority that had made him successful in his military and civilian careers. "You're going to listen. You're going to sit there, finish your lunch, and listen to exactly how this is going to work." Mike's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "First, you're going to transfer your shares in Morrison Security to me for $1. The paperwork will be ready by end of business today. Second, you're going to return every client file, password, and piece of proprietary information you've stolen. Third, you're going to end whatever fantasy you and my wife have been playing." "Blake, you don't understand. I understand that you used my son as a cover for your affair. I understand that you've been planning to steal my clients and my business. I understand that you've been recording videos in my home like some kind of perverted trophy hunter." Mike's face crumpled. "She told you about the videos?" Blake almost smiled. "Diana didn't tell me anything. I found out myself." Which brings us to the interesting part of this conversation. Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than a shout. "You see, Mike, Diana thinks this is about love. She thinks you two are star-crossed lovers fighting against the constraints of society. But you and I both know the truth. This was never about her. This was about taking everything I've built." Mike started to protest, but Blake held up a hand. "The affair was just the weapon. The real target was always my business, my reputation, my life. Diana was a means to an end, a way to get close enough to destroy me from the inside." Blake's psychological assessment was brutal in its accuracy. Mike had initially been attracted to Diana, but the relationship had evolved into something calculated and predatory. Blake's business success, his military reputation, his seemingly perfect life, it all represented everything Mike felt he deserved but had never earned. "Here's what's going to happen," Blake continued. "You're going to call Diana tonight and tell her the affair is over. You're going to explain that you were using her to get back at me for some imagined slight. You're going to break her heart so thoroughly that she'll hate you more than she could ever hate me." Mike's jaw dropped. "You want me to lie to her? I want you to tell her the truth, because we both know that's exactly what this was." Blake stood, throwing cash on the table. "You have until 5 p.m. to deliver the signed transfer documents and return my property. After that, I stop being reasonable." As Blake walked away, Mike called after him. "And if I don't?" Blake paused at the restaurant's entrance, turning back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'll remind you why they called me the Iceman in the service. And Mike, they didn't call me that because I was cool under pressure." Blake left Mike sitting alone at the table, his untouched food growing cold. Back at his office, Blake found Carmen waiting with a visitor, Detective Ray Kowalski from the city's Financial Crimes Unit. Blake had worked with Ray on several corporate investigation cases, and they developed a mutual respect based on shared military backgrounds. "Ray," Blake said, shaking hands, "what brings you by?" "Carmen said you might have some information relevant to an ongoing investigation." Blake raised an eyebrow at Carmen, who simply shrugged. "I may have mentioned that you'd recently discovered some irregularities in business file access." Blake invited Ray into his office, closing the door behind them. "What kind of investigation are we talking about?" Blake asked. "Corporate espionage. Someone's been selling client security assessments to competitors. We've tracked the sales back to a series of shell companies, but we can't identify the source." Blake felt a cold satisfaction settling over him. "What kind of evidence would you need?" "Digital files showing unauthorized access, copies of stolen documents, financial records linking the thefts to personal accounts. Pretty standard stuff." Blake opened his laptop, pulling up Mike's access logs from the past 6 months. "Hypothetically, if I had evidence of a business partner systematically copying client files and storing them on personal devices, would that interest you?" Ray leaned forward. "Very much." Blake turned the screen around, showing Mike's late-night access patterns, file download records, and email logs. And if I could prove those files are being sold to competitors through shell companies? I need to see the financial connections, but if you have that. Blake opened another window, displaying bank records he'd accessed through Mike's personal laptop the night before. Mike had been sloppy, using the same passwords for business and personal accounts. Jesus, Ray whispered. How long has this been going on? At least 8 months. Maybe longer. Ray studied the evidence for several minutes before looking up at Blake. I have to ask, how did you discover this? Blake's expression was carefully neutral. I had reason to investigate potential security breaches within my organization. Ray nodded, understanding the subtext. Blake wasn't going to volunteer information about the affair, but he wasn't hiding the business crimes either. I'll need official copies of these files, and I'll need you to testify about your discovery of the thefts. Of course. What do you need them? How about this afternoon? I'd like to have an arrest warrant ready before close of business. Blake glanced at his watch. It was 2:30 p.m. Mike had 2.5 hours to comply with Blake's demands, but it no longer mattered. Blake had just ensured that Mike would be spending the foreseeable future dealing with federal criminal charges. After Ray left with the evidence files, Carmen knocked on Blake's door. There's something else you should know, she said. I've been monitoring your home security system like you asked. Diana left the house at 1:45 p.m. and drove to Mike's place. She's still there. Blake nodded. He'd expected as much. Mike would have called Diana immediately after lunch, probably spinning some version of events that made Blake look like the villain. Carmen, I need you to make some calls. I want divorce attorneys, financial advisors, and private investigators standing by. Also, contact our insurance company about bonding irregularities with business partners. Already done, Carmen said. And Blake? I'm sorry. Mike seemed like a good guy. Blake looked out his office window at the city below. The best betrayals always come from people who seem like good guys. That's what makes them so effective. At 4:30 p.m., Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. I need more time. This is complicated. Blake responded immediately. No extensions. You had years to plan this. You get 30 more minutes. At 4:55 p.m., Detective Kowalski called Blake's direct line. We're moving on Torres now. Do you want to be present for the arrest? Blake considered the offer. Part of him wanted to see Mike's face when the handcuffs clicked into place. But he had bigger plans for the evening. No, thanks. I have other matters to attend to. Understood. We'll be in touch about testimony schedules. Blake hung up and gathered his things. It was time to go home and have a conversation with his wife. As he drove through the suburban streets toward his house, Blake reflected on the day's events. Mike was about to discover that betraying Blake Morrison came with consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings and broken friendships. Diana was about to learn the same lesson. Blake Morrison had spent his career protecting other people from threats they couldn't see coming. Tonight, he was going to become the threat that his own family never saw coming. And unlike his enemies in the field, Diana and Mike had nowhere to run. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Blake pulled into his driveway at 6:15 p.m., noting that Diana's BMW was already in the garage. Through the kitchen window, he could see her moving around, probably preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. Tyler met him at the door, his backpack slung over his shoulder and his face still carrying the worry from the night before. Dad, can we talk? Blake knelt to his son's level. What's on your mind, buddy? Is Uncle Mike in trouble? Blake felt his chest tighten. Tyler might be 8 years old, but he was perceptive enough to sense the tension crackling through their previously stable world. Why do you ask? Mom's been crying, and she keeps trying to call Uncle Mike, but he's not answering. Blake glanced toward the kitchen, where Diana was indeed moving with the jerky, distracted motions of someone fighting tears. Tyler, sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt other people. When that happens, there are consequences. Did Uncle Mike make a mistake? Blake chose his words carefully. Uncle Mike betrayed our family. That's not something I can forgive. Tyler nodded solemnly, accepting his father's judgment with the absolute trust that children place in their parents. It was a trust Blake intended to honor, even if it meant becoming the villain in his wife's story. Go do your homework, Blake said. I need to talk to Mom. Tyler headed upstairs, leaving Blake alone with the sound of Diana aggressively chopping vegetables in the kitchen. He loosened his tie and walked into what was about to become a battlefield. Diana looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "How was your lunch with Mike?" "Interesting," Blake replied, pouring himself a bourbon from the bottle they kept on the counter. "How was your afternoon?" Diana's knife paused mid-chop. "I did some shopping. Ran errands." "Funny thing about errands," Blake said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They usually involve going to stores or businesses, not driving to your lover's house to plan damage control." The knife clattered to the cutting board. Diana's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally resignation. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to be disappointed in how predictable you've both been." Diana turned to face him fully, and Blake saw something in her expression that surprised him. Relief. "I was going to tell you," she said, "after Tyler's birthday party next month. We didn't want to disrupt." "Don't." Blake's voice cut through her justification like a blade. "Don't pretend this was about protecting our son. You used him as cover for your affair. You made him complicit in your betrayal." Diana's composure cracked. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Mike and I tried to fight it, but you decided your happiness was more important than your family's stability." "I understand. What I don't understand is why you thought I'd let you walk away with half of everything I built." Diana straightened, her lawyer consultation research giving her confidence. "This is a no-fault divorce state, Blake. The courts don't care about adultery when dividing assets." Blake smiled, and Diana took an involuntary step backward. "You're right. The courts don't care about adultery, but they care very much about fraud, conspiracy, and theft." "What are you talking about?" Blake pulled out his phone, opening a video file. Diana's face appeared on the screen, clearly recognizable in Mike's bedroom. But what made her gasp wasn't her nudity. It was the timestamp showing the date she'd told Blake she was at her sister's funeral in Denver. "You weren't the only one Mike was recording," Blake said quietly. "He's been documenting everything. Every lie you told me. Every family event you missed for your secret meetings. Every time you chose your affair over your husband and son." Diana sank into a kitchen chair, her face pale. "You're lying. Mike wouldn't." "Mike is currently being arrested for corporate espionage and theft. The FBI found evidence that he's been selling client security assessments to competitors for months. Apparently, adultery wasn't enough excitement for him. He needed to add felony theft to the mix." Diana's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "But here's the really fascinating part," Blake continued. "Mike's been keeping detailed records of everything. Financial accounts, meeting locations, even audio recordings of your conversations about leaving me. The FBI is very interested in his files." Blake wasn't lying about the arrest, but he was creatively interpreting the scope of Mike's documentation. Let Diana's imagination fill in the blanks. "I want to see Tyler," Diana whispered. "Tyler is upstairs doing homework. He's going to continue living in this house, attending his school, and maintaining his routine. The only question is whether you'll be part of that routine." Diana looked up sharply. "You can't keep me from my son. I don't want to keep you from Tyler. But I also won't let you destroy his stability for the sake of your guilt." Blake sat across from Diana, his voice becoming businesslike. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. You're going to accept primary custody, remaining with me, with reasonable visitation for you. You're going to sign a property settlement that gives you the BMW, your personal belongings, and enough money to start over somewhere else. That's not enough. I'm entitled to half. You're entitled to what I decide you're entitled to. Because if you force this into a contested divorce, I'll make sure every detail of your affair becomes public record. I'll make sure Tyler knows exactly why his family fell apart. I'll make sure your parents, your sister, your book club friends, and everyone else in your social circle knows that you chose another man over your family." Diana's face hardened. "You're threatening me. I'm explaining consequences. You made choices, Diana. Now you get to live with them." Blake finished his bourbon and stood. "You have until Monday to decide. Accept my terms, or spend the next year watching me dismantle your life piece by piece in family court." As Blake walked toward the stairs, Diana called after him. "What about Tyler? What are you going to tell him?" Blake paused, his hand on the banister. "I'm going to tell him the truth. That his mother chose to leave us for another man, but that it's not his fault and he's going to be okay. Blake, please, can we work this out? For Tyler's sake? Blake turned back to look at his wife, really look at her. For a moment, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. The woman who'd promised to stand by him through everything. The woman who'd held his hand when Tyler was born and whispered that they were going to be an amazing family. Then he remembered the videos, the lies, the way she'd used their son as cover for her betrayal. Diana, Blake said quietly, some things can't be fixed. This is one of them. Blake climbed the stairs, leaving Diana alone in the kitchen with the ruins of her marriage and the echo of choices that couldn't be undone. Behind Tyler's closed door, Blake could hear the soft sounds of his son working on homework. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Blake intended to make sure Tyler's world stayed as normal and safe as possible, even if it meant becoming the kind of man who destroyed families to save them. Some prices were worth paying. Chapter 5. The Domino Effect. Monday morning brought news that exceeded even Blake's expectations. Carmen greeted him with coffee and a stack of newspapers, their headlines varying, but their message consistent. Local security executive arrested in corporate espionage ring. Mike made page 1, Carmen said, barely concealing her satisfaction. The reporter had access to some very detailed information about his methods. Blake scanned the article, noting quotes from anonymous law enforcement sources that painted Mike as a calculating criminal who betrayed trust for profit. The story mentioned his access to high-profile client information and suggested the investigation was expanding to include potential co-conspirators. Any word from Diana's attorney? Blake asked. She signed the papers Friday afternoon. Clean divorce, terms as discussed. She's moving to Phoenix to stay with her sister. Blake nodded. Diana had chosen pragmatism over pride, accepting his settlement rather than risk a public trial. It was the smart choice, though Blake suspected it was prompted more by Mike's arrest than by any desire for an amicable resolution. And Tyler. Dr. Martinez has cleared her schedule for this afternoon. She thinks family counseling sessions will help him process the changes. Blake had spent the weekend explaining the divorce to Tyler in age-appropriate terms. The boy had taken the news better than expected, though Blake suspected the full impact hadn't hit yet. There's one more thing, Carmen said, her tone shifting. We have a new client request. Meridian Industries wants to expand their security contract. Blake looked up from the newspaper. Meridian was Mike's target client, the company he'd planned to steal from Morrison Security. What kind of expansion? Full corporate protection services. They want background checks on all employees with access to sensitive information, comprehensive security assessments, and ongoing monitoring of potential threats. Blake smiled grimly. Mike's arrest had apparently made Meridian's executives nervous about their current security protocols. Set up a meeting for this afternoon. After my session with Tyler. Carmen handed him a file folder. There's also this. From Detective Kowalski. Inside were photographs and documents Blake hadn't seen before. Evidence from Mike's house that painted an even darker picture of the conspiracy. Mike hadn't just been stealing client files. He'd been building dossiers on Blake's employees, tracking their personal vulnerabilities and financial pressures. One document made Blake's blood run cold. It was a psychological profile of Tyler, complete with notes about the boy's routines, fears, and attachment to Uncle Mike. The final paragraph suggested that Tyler could be used as leverage for cooperation if Blake discovered the theft operation. Blake set the document down carefully, his hands perfectly steady despite the rage building inside him. Carmen, I need you to run a complete security audit on Tyler's school, our house, and any place he regularly visits. I want to know if Mike planted any surveillance devices. Already in progress. We found 3 listening devices. One in Tyler's room, one in your home office, and one in the kitchen. Blake's jaw tightened. Mike had been recording his family's private conversations for months, gathering intelligence like they were enemy combatants. There's more, Carmen continued. Mike had been photographing Tyler at school events, soccer games, even just playing in your yard. We found over 200 photos on his personal computer. Blake stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Where is Mike being held? County lockup, pending federal transfer. Blake, what are you thinking? Blake was thinking about a conversation he'd had with Tyler over the weekend. His son had asked if Uncle Mike was ever going to visit again, and Blake had assured him that Mike was gone forever. But Tyler deserved to understand exactly why that was necessary. Schedule a meeting with the DA's office. I want to discuss additional charges. What kind of charges? Blake picked up the photos of his son. Stalking, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Carmen's eyes widened. Blake, some of those might be hard to prove. Then we'll make them easier to prove. Blake spent the afternoon session with Dr. Martinez and Tyler, answering the boys' questions about the divorce and establishing new routines that didn't include Uncle Mike. Tyler was resilient, adapting to the changes with the flexibility that children possessed, but Blake could see the confusion in his eyes. Will I still get to have sleepovers? Tyler asked. With other friends, yes, but not with Uncle Mike. Because he made bad choices? Because he hurt our family, and I won't let anyone do that again. Tyler seemed to accept this explanation, though Dr. Martinez made notes about monitoring his emotional adjustment over the coming months. After the session, Blake drove to the Meridian Industries headquarters, a glass tower downtown that housed one of the city's largest corporations. The executive team was waiting in a conference room that overlooked the city. Mr. Morrison, said Patricia Webb, Meridian CEO, thank you for coming on short notice. Blake shook hands with the assembled executives, noting the tension in the room. We understand you've had some internal security issues, Webb continued. Former partner betrayed client confidentiality for financial gain, Blake said simply. The situation has been resolved. We'd like to ensure our information remains secure going forward. Blake opened his briefcase, removing a comprehensive security proposal he'd prepared that morning. Full employee background checks, biometric access controls, encrypted communications, and real-time monitoring of all data access, plus personal protection services for executive staff and their families. The financial terms were aggressive, triple what Meridian was currently paying for basic security consulting. But Blake knew they were scared, and scared clients paid premium prices for peace of mind. This seems extensive, said the CFO. Corporate espionage cost Meridian $12 million last quarter, Blake replied. My former partner sold your expansion plans to 3 different competitors. This level of security ensures that never happens again. The executives exchanged glances. Blake's research had been accurate. Meridian had indeed suffered significant losses from leaked information. What guarantees do we have that your current employees are trustworthy? Webb asked. Blake smiled. Every member of my team has been personally vetted by me. They're former military or law enforcement, with security clearances and proven loyalty records. More importantly, they understand that betraying Morrison Security means betraying me personally. Blake's reputation in the security industry was built on 2 things: competence and consequences. His employees knew that he rewarded loyalty generously and punished betrayal ruthlessly. And if something goes wrong, then I personally guarantee that the responsible party will face consequences that extend far beyond termination. Webb nodded slowly. We'll need to discuss this with our board, but I think we can move forward. Blake left Meridian with a 3-year contract worth $8 million, more than his entire previous annual revenue. Mike's betrayal had inadvertently positioned Morrison Security as the premier firm for companies worried about internal threats. That evening, Blake sat in his home office reviewing the day's developments. Diana was in Phoenix, probably starting her new life with whatever savings she'd managed to accumulate. Mike was in federal custody, facing charges that would likely result in a decade-long prison sentence. But Blake wasn't satisfied. Mike's surveillance of Tyler crossed lines that went beyond business betrayal or adultery. It suggested a level of predatory behavior that demanded a more personal response. Blake opened his laptop and began researching the federal prison system, looking for institutions where Mike would likely be housed. He had contacts throughout the correction system, former clients who owed him favors, security consultants who worked inside federal facilities. Mike Torres had made the mistake of threatening Blake's son. That wasn't a business matter or a legal issue. That was personal. And Blake Morrison handled personal matters very differently than he handled business disputes. Chapter 6. Inside Information. Blake's contact inside the federal system was a man named Vincent Torres, no relation to Mike, despite the shared surname. Vincent ran security operations at FCI Beaumont, a medium-security federal prison in Texas where white-collar criminals served their sentences alongside more violent offenders. Vincent owed Blake a significant debt. 3 years earlier, Blake had provided security for Vincent's daughter's wedding after credible threats from a drug cartel that Vincent had helped prosecute during his time as a federal prosecutor. Blake's team had neutralized the threat quietly and effectively, ensuring the wedding proceeded without incident. Now Blake was calling in that favor. "Vincent, I need information about an incoming inmate. Mike Torres, arrested for corporate espionage. Let me check the system." Blake heard typing on the other end of the call. "Yeah, he's scheduled for transfer here next month." "Why the interest?" "Personal matter. This man targeted my family." Vincent's tone shifted. In their circles, threats to family were understood to require special handling. "What kind of personal matter?" Blake explained Mike's surveillance of Tyler, the photos, the psychological profiles. By the time he finished, Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Jesus, Blake. That's predatory behavior. The kind that doesn't play well in general population. I'm not asking you to do anything directly. I just want to ensure that the right people know about his particular interests." In federal prison, certain crimes carried social consequences that extended far beyond legal sentencing. Child endangerment, even peripherally, marked an inmate for particular attention from other prisoners. "I understand. Word gets around, especially about guys who take pictures of kids. I appreciate your understanding." "Blake, there's something else. Torres has been trying to make deals with federal prosecutors. Claims he has information about other security firms, other corporate espionage operations." Blake felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Mike was exactly the type of person who would try to reduce his sentence by implicating others, regardless of whether his information was accurate. "Any specifics?" "Nothing concrete yet, but he's mentioned your company specifically. Claims you had knowledge of his activities." Blake had expected this. Mike's desperation would lead him to construct elaborate fictions about Blake's involvement, hoping to trade false information for a reduced sentence. "Vincent, I need you to understand something. Anything Mike Torres says about me or my business is fabricated. He's trying to create reasonable doubt about his own guilt by suggesting broader conspiracies. I figured as much, but you should know that the prosecutors are listening." Blake thanked Vincent and ended the call, then immediately contacted his attorney. If Mike was planning to implicate Blake in fictitious crimes, Blake needed to be prepared for additional federal scrutiny. But first, he had other business to handle. Blake drove to Tyler's school for the scheduled parent-teacher conference. Ms. Patterson, Tyler's third-grade teacher, was a kind woman in her 50s who'd been teaching long enough to recognize when children were processing difficult family changes. "Tyler's been quieter than usual," she reported. "He's not participating in group activities as much, and he seems distracted during lessons. We're going through a divorce," Blake explained. "His mother moved out of state, and he's adjusting to a new routine." Ms. Patterson nodded sympathetically. "Divorce is always hard on children. Have you considered counseling? We've started family therapy. Dr. Martinez thinks Tyler is processing the changes well, but it's going to take time." "There is one other thing," Ms. Patterson said hesitantly. Tyler mentioned that his Uncle Mike used to take pictures of him at school events. He seemed confused about why Uncle Mike isn't around anymore. Blake's jaw tightened. "Uncle Mike won't be around anymore. Ever." Ms. Patterson caught the finality in Blake's tone. "I see. Well, if there are any safety concerns." "There are no ongoing safety concerns. Uncle Mike is no longer in a position to be around children." Blake left the school with Tyler, who chattered about his day with forced cheerfulness. Blake recognized the behavior. Tyler was trying to be strong for his father, hiding his own confusion and sadness behind a brave facade. "Hey, buddy," Blake said as they drove home. "You know it's okay to be sad about Uncle Mike, right? Even when someone hurts our family, it's normal to miss them." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I don't understand why he took pictures of me." Blake pulled into their driveway and turned to face his son. "Sometimes adults make very bad choices. Uncle Mike's choices hurt our family, and they could have hurt you too. That's why he can't be around us anymore. Will he ever say he's sorry? Blake considered lying, offering Tyler the hope of eventual redemption and reconciliation. But Mike Torres had crossed lines that Blake would never forgive, and Tyler deserved honesty. No, buddy. Some mistakes are too big for sorry to fix. Tyler nodded solemnly, accepting his father's judgment with the absolute trust that children place in their parents. That evening, after Tyler was asleep, Blake received a call from Detective Kowalski. Blake, we've got a problem. Torres is claiming you were involved in the corporate espionage operation. Blake sat down at his kitchen table, pouring himself a bourbon. What specifically is he claiming? Says you knew about the file thefts and took a percentage of the profits. Claims he has evidence that you helped plan which clients to target. Blake laughed, a sound without humor. Ray, think about that for a second. Why would I steal from my own clients? Why would I risk my business, my reputation, and my freedom for a few $1,000s in illegal profits? That's what I told the federal prosecutor. But Torres is convincing, and he's offering details that suggest inside knowledge. Details he acquired through months of surveillance and theft. Mike Torres knows my business operations because he was my partner and because he planted listening devices in my home and office. Blake had been expecting this development, but hearing it confirmed still triggered a cold anger. Mike wasn't content with destroying Blake's marriage and threatening his son. He was now trying to implicate Blake in federal crimes. What do you need from me? Blake asked. Complete financial records, client communication logs, and any surveillance footage from your office that shows Torres accessing files without authorization. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. After hanging up, Blake sat in his kitchen, sipping bourbon and considering his options. Mike's false accusations would be disproven easily enough. Blake's financial records were scrupulously clean, and the surveillance footage clearly showed Mike's unauthorized activities. But the accusations themselves represented a new level of betrayal. Mike wasn't just destroying his own life. He was actively trying to destroy Blake's. Blake finished his drink and headed to his home office. He had phone calls to make and plans to adjust. Mike Torres wanted to play games with federal prosecutors. Blake would show him what a real game looked like. By the time Mike realized the rules had changed, it would be far too late to forfeit. Chapter 7. Federal Scrutiny. The FBI arrived at Morrison Security at 7 a.m. on Thursday morning with a search warrant and a convoy of black SUVs that sent Blake's employees scrambling for their phones. Agent Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, presented the warrant to Blake personally. Mr. Morrison, we need to examine your financial records, client files, and computer systems in connection with an ongoing investigation. Blake examined the warrant carefully, noting its scope and limitations. Agent Chun, my attorney will be here within the hour. Until then, my employees will cooperate fully, but I'll need to observe any examination of confidential client materials. Agent Chun nodded. Federal agents rarely enjoyed fishing expeditions, especially when the target was a former military officer with a clean record and powerful clients. Mr. Morrison, we've received allegations that you participated in or had knowledge of corporate espionage activities conducted by your former partner, Michael Torres. Agent Chun, those allegations are false, and I believe they're motivated by Mr. Torres's desire to reduce his own sentence by implicating innocent parties. Blake's attorney, David Kim, arrived precisely 1 hour later, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd been interrupted during his morning coffee. Blake, don't say another word. Agent Chun, what exactly are you looking for? Agent Chun handed Kim a copy of the warrant. Evidence of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Kim reviewed the warrant while Blake watched federal agents photograph his office, copy computer hard drives, and examine financial records. The investigation was thorough but professional. They weren't conducting a raid so much as building a comprehensive record. Agent Chun, Kim said after finishing his review, my client is prepared to provide complete cooperation. However, some of these files contain classified information related to government contracts. We'll need to arrange secure viewing protocols. Blake had anticipated this moment. His business included contracts with defense contractors and government agencies, work that required security clearances and involved sensitive information. The FBI couldn't simply walk away with classified materials. "We'll need to schedule secure viewing at a federal facility," Agent Chin agreed. "Mr. Morrison, will you be available next week for additional questioning?" "Of course, but I think you'll find that Michael Torres's allegations don't match the evidence." Agent Chin's expression was neutral, but Blake caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was already reaching similar conclusions. Blake spent the afternoon rebuilding his office and reassuring clients that the federal investigation wouldn't affect their security arrangements. By evening, 3 major corporations had called to express continued confidence in Morrison security, and 2 new clients had inquired about services. Apparently, being investigated by the FBI was seen as a mark of thoroughness in the security industry. That evening, Blake received an unexpected call from Diana. "Blake, I saw the news about the FBI investigation. Are you all right?" Blake was surprised by the genuine concern in his ex-wife's voice. "I'm fine. Mike is trying to implicate me in his crimes to reduce his sentence. It won't work. I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult." Blake sat down, considering his response. Despite everything that had happened, Diana had been a significant part of his life for 12 years. "Diana, I need to ask you something. Did Mike ever mention involving me in his business schemes? Did he suggest that I knew about his activities?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. "Actually, yes. He said you were probably suspicious, but that you couldn't prove anything. He thought you might be planning to cut him out of the business." Blake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Mike hadn't just been stealing from clients. He'd been building a narrative that would allow him to claim Blake was the real mastermind. "Did he ask you to say anything specific if you were ever questioned about our relationship?" "He wanted me to tell investigators that you were controlling and paranoid about the business, that you monitored everyone's activities and required reports on client interactions." Blake almost laughed. Mike had been trying to use Diana's testimony to support a conspiracy theory that painted Blake as the criminal mastermind. "Diana, I need you to tell the truth to any federal investigators who contact you. Just the truth, without any spin or interpretation that Mike suggested." "Of course. Blake, I want you to know that despite everything that happened between us, I never believed you were involved in Mike's crimes." Blake felt a strange mix of anger and gratitude toward his ex-wife. She betrayed their marriage, but she wasn't participating in Mike's attempt to destroy Blake's freedom. "Thank you. That means more than you might realize." After ending the call, Blake reviewed the day's events. The FBI investigation was proceeding exactly as he'd expected. Federal agents were finding evidence that supported Blake's innocence and contradicted Mike's allegations. But Blake wasn't content to simply wait for the investigation to clear his name. Mike had forced this confrontation by involving federal prosecutors in his revenge fantasy. Now Blake was going to finish it. Blake spent the evening researching Mike's legal representation. Mike's attorney was a public defender named Robert Martinez, an overworked lawyer handling dozens of federal cases simultaneously. Martinez was competent but stretched thin, unlikely to provide the kind of aggressive defense that might help Mike avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Blake called a contact in the legal community, a defense attorney named Patricia Vance who specialized in white-collar crimes. "Patricia, I need information about a case. Michael Torres, charged with corporate espionage." "Blake, I can't discuss ongoing cases with civilians. I'm not asking for privileged information. I need to understand the strength of the prosecutor's case and whether Torres is likely to accept a plea bargain." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Blake had referred several clients to her over the years, generating significant business for her practice. Off the record, the case is solid. Multiple felony counts, clear evidence, and no viable defense strategy. Torres is looking at 15 to 20 years unless he can provide substantial cooperation. What kind of cooperation would reduce his sentence? Information leading to additional prosecutions. Evidence of broader criminal conspiracies. Testimony against co-conspirators. Blake thanked Patricia and ended the call. Mike's accusations against Blake were motivated by desperate hope rather than actual evidence. The federal prosecutor would eventually realize that Mike's claims were fabricated, but not before Blake's reputation suffered additional damage. Blake decided it was time to accelerate Mike's legal timeline. Blake had contacts throughout the federal law enforcement community, relationships built over years of providing security services to government agencies. One of those contacts was Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong, who'd worked with Blake on several cases involving corporate espionage. Jessica, I understand you're handling the Torres prosecution. Blake, you know I can't discuss active cases with potential witnesses. I'm not asking about the case. I'm offering additional evidence that might interest you. Blake had spent the afternoon reviewing Mike's electronic communications, particularly his attempts to contact other security firms about business opportunities. What Blake found suggested that Mike's criminal activities extended beyond Morrison Security. What kind of evidence? Communications indicating that Torres attempted to recruit accomplices at other firms. Financial records showing payments from shell companies linked to competitors. Evidence that his criminal activities were more extensive than originally believed. Blake was offering Jessica the opportunity to expand her prosecution beyond a single defendant, transforming a straightforward corporate espionage case into a broader investigation of industry-wide criminal activity. I need to review the evidence before making any commitments. I'll have everything ready by Monday morning. Blake hung up, satisfied with the day's progress. By offering additional evidence against Mike, Blake was ensuring that federal prosecutors would have less interest in pursuing Mike's unsubstantiated allegations against Blake. More importantly, Blake was guaranteeing that Mike's sentence would be significantly longer than originally anticipated. Mike Torres had chosen to make Blake's life difficult with false accusations and desperate lies. Blake was about to make Mike's life very difficult indeed. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Blake's additional evidence against Mike proved devastating. The communications Blake provided to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong revealed a network of corporate espionage that extended to 3 other security firms and involved over 24 client companies. Within a week of Blake's meeting with prosecutors, the FBI had arrested 4 additional suspects and seized millions of dollars in assets. Mike Torres, originally facing 15 years for corporate espionage, was now looking at federal racketeering charges that carried a potential life sentence. Blake watched the expanded arrest from his office, feeling a grim satisfaction as news reports detailed the scope of the criminal conspiracy. Mike's attempt to implicate Blake had backfired spectacularly, positioning Blake as a whistleblower whose cooperation had exposed a major criminal network. Carmen knocked on Blake's office door, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a smile that didn't quite hide her concern. The FBI called. Agent Shun wants to meet with you this afternoon for a final interview. Blake nodded. The federal investigation into his alleged involvement had been quietly closed after prosecutors realized that Mike's accusations were fabricated. Today's meeting was likely a formality designed to officially clear Blake's name. Also, Carmen continued, Tyler's school called. He got into a fight during recess. Blake looked up sharply. Tyler had never been aggressive, preferring books and quiet games to physical confrontation. What happened? Another boy said something about his mom leaving. Tyler punched him. Blake sighed, rubbing his temples. He'd been so focused on destroying Mike and protecting his business that he'd underestimated the emotional toll on his son. I'll pick him up after my meeting with Agent Shun. Blake spent the afternoon providing a final statement to federal investigators, officially confirming Mike's guilt and his own innocence. Agent Shun was professional, but clearly annoyed that she'd spent weeks investigating baseless allegations. Mr. Morrison, Michael Torres has admitted that his claims against you were fabricated. He was hoping to create reasonable doubt about his own guilt by suggesting broader conspiracies. Blake nodded. Agent Shun, I appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation. I understand that you had to follow up on his allegations. For what it's worth, we never found any evidence supporting Torres's claims. Your financial records are clean, your business practices are legitimate, and your cooperation has been exemplary. Agent Shun closed her file folder. This investigation is officially closed. I don't anticipate any further contact from our office. Blake shook Agent Shun's hand, then drove to Tyler's school. He found his son sitting in the principal's office, his knuckles scraped and his face set in an expression Blake recognized, the stubborn defiance of someone who knew they'd done wrong but wasn't sorry. "Tyler," Blake said, sitting in the chair next to his son. "Want to tell me what happened?" Jeremy said Mom left because she didn't love us anymore. He said divorced kids always have moms who run away. Blake felt his chest tighten. Tyler was carrying emotional wounds that Blake's focus on revenge had left unaddressed. "So you hit him?" "I told him to take it back. When he wouldn't, I made him." Blake almost smiled despite the situation. Tyler was definitely his son. Direct action in response to unacceptable behavior. "Tyler, Jeremy was wrong about your mom. She left because she made bad choices, not because she doesn't love you. But hitting people doesn't solve problems. It stopped Jeremy from saying mean things. This time, but next time, Jeremy might hit back. Or he might tell everyone that Tyler Morrison solves problems with his fists instead of his brain." Tyler considered this, his 8-year-old mind processing the implications. "What should I have done?" "Told Jeremy that he doesn't know anything about our family. Walked away. Found a teacher if he kept bothering you." Tyler nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I hit him. I'm proud that you defended our family. I'm less proud of how you did it." Blake talked with Tyler's teacher and principal, establishing consequences that focused on better conflict resolution rather than punishment. Tyler would apologize to Jeremy and spend a week helping in the school library during recess. As they drove home, Tyler was quiet until they reached their driveway. "Dad, are you sad that Mom left?" Blake considered his answer carefully. "I'm sad that our family changed, but I'm not sad that it's just you and me now. Are you going to find a new mom for me?" Blake pulled into the garage, turning to look at his son. "Tyler, I'm not looking for anyone right now. We're doing fine on our own." Jeremy said divorced dads always get new wives who are mean to kids. Blake unbuckled his seatbelt, studying Tyler's worried expression. "Jeremy seems to have a lot of opinions about things he doesn't understand. I'm not Jeremy's dad, and Jeremy isn't you." That evening, Blake made Tyler's favorite dinner and helped with homework, trying to restore some normalcy to their routine. But he could see the questions in Tyler's eyes, the uncertainty about their future that Blake's focus on revenge had created. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Kowalski. Torres pled guilty to all charges. Sentence hearing next month. Thought you'd want to know. Blake set his phone aside without responding. Mike's legal consequences were no longer important compared to Tyler's emotional well-being. But Blake's satisfaction was interrupted by another phone call, this one from his attorney David Kim. "Blake, we need to talk. There's been a development in the Torres case." "What kind of development?" "Torres is claiming that his guilty plea was coerced. He's filed a motion to withdraw the plea, and he's requesting a new attorney." Blake felt a familiar cold anger settling over him. Even facing decades in prison, Mike was still trying to create problems for Blake. What's his basis for claiming coercion? He says federal investigators pressured him to accept responsibility for crimes he didn't commit. He's claiming that additional evidence was fabricated to strengthen the case against him. Blake almost laughed. Mike was accusing the FBI of the same tactics Mike had tried to use against Blake. "David, is there any chance his motion will be successful?" "Unlikely. He's already admitted guilt in open court, and the evidence against him is overwhelming. But it might delay his sentencing and create additional media attention." Blake thanked David and hung up, then looked through the kitchen doorway at Tyler, who was reading quietly in the living room. Mike Torres was still trying to damage Blake's life, even from federal custody. But Blake was done playing defensive games. It was time to remind Mike that some people should never be threatened. Blake had tolerated Mike's false accusations and legal maneuvering because he'd assumed Mike would eventually accept defeat and serve his sentence quietly. Apparently, Blake had overestimated Mike's intelligence. Now Blake was going to finish this permanently. Chapter 9, Final Justice. Blake's patience with Mike Torres ended the moment he learned about the motion to withdraw the guilty plea. That night, after Tyler was asleep, Blake made a series of phone calls that would ensure Mike never threatened his family again. The first call was to Vincent Torres at FCI Beaumont. "Vincent, I need to accelerate our previous conversation about Mike Torres. He's attempting to create additional legal problems for my family." "Understand." What timeline are we discussing? Torres will be transferred to your facility within 2 weeks. I need the population to understand his particular interests before he arrives. In federal prison, advance information about incoming inmates was crucial for maintaining order. Child predators, snitches, and certain white-collar criminals required special handling to prevent violence. Consider it handled, Vincent said. Word gets around, especially about guys who take inappropriate photos of children. Blake's second call was to Patricia Vance, the defense attorney who'd provided information about Mike's case. Patricia, I need a favor. Mike Torres is requesting new legal representation. I'd like you to consider taking his case. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Blake, that seems like a conflict of interest given your involvement in his prosecution. Actually, it would ensure he receives competent representation while also guaranteeing that his legal strategy focuses on legitimate defense rather than false accusations against innocent parties. Blake was offering to pay Patricia's fees to represent Mike, ensuring that Mike received excellent legal counsel that would discourage frivolous motions and desperate gambits. I see. And you think this would benefit him how? Patricia, Mike Torres is looking at 40 years in federal prison. His current strategy of making false accusations and filing baseless motions is only making his situation worse. You could provide him with realistic advice about accepting responsibility and focusing on sentence mitigation. Patricia agreed to consider the arrangement, which would provide Mike with better representation while ensuring his legal strategy remained focused on legitimate issues rather than revenge fantasies. Blake's third call was to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong. Jessica, I understand Torres is trying to withdraw his guilty plea. Blake, I can't discuss plea negotiations. I'm not asking about negotiations. I'm offering additional cooperation. If Torres wants to claim his confession was coerced, I'm prepared to testify about the voluntary nature of his admissions and the accuracy of the evidence against him. Blake was volunteering to strengthen the prosecution's case against Mike's withdrawal motion, ensuring that Mike's guilty plea would stand regardless of his current legal maneuvering. Blake's final call was to Diana in Phoenix. Diana, I need you to understand something. Mike is still trying to cause problems for our family from prison. If federal investigators contact you again, I need you to tell them exactly what Mike said about implicating innocent people. Blake, what's happening? Blake explained Mike's motion to withdraw his guilty plea and his continued attempts to create legal problems for Blake. Diana, Mike used you to hurt our family, and now he's trying to use false accusations to escape responsibility for his crimes. I need you to help ensure that doesn't happen. Diana agreed to provide complete cooperation with federal prosecutors, including testimony about Mike's plans to falsely implicate Blake in criminal activity. With these arrangements in place, Blake felt confident that Mike's legal options were effectively eliminated. Patricia Vance would provide excellent defense counsel while discouraging frivolous motions. Jessica Wong would have additional evidence to defeat Mike's withdrawal attempt. Vincent Torres would ensure that Mike's prison experience reflected the seriousness of his crimes. But Blake wasn't finished. The following week, Blake received a call from Tyler's school. Ms. Patterson had news that surprised him. Mr. Morrison, Tyler wrote a story for his creative writing assignment that I think you should read. Blake reviewed Tyler's story, which described a brave knight who protected his kingdom from a dragon that had infiltrated the royal court by pretending to be a friend. The knight discovered the dragon's true nature and banished it forever, ensuring the kingdom's safety. Tyler's processing the changes in your family through his writing, Ms. Patterson explained. He understands that someone he trusted betrayed that trust, and he's working through his feelings about it. Blake felt a surge of pride in his son's resilience and emotional intelligence. Tyler was healing from the disruption to his world, but he was also learning important lessons about trust, betrayal, and consequences. That evening, Blake found Tyler reading in his room. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. In my story, the knight banished the dragon forever. But what if the dragon tries to come back? Blake sat on Tyler's bed, choosing his words carefully. Tyler, some people make such bad choices that they lose the right to be part of our lives. When that happens, we don't let them come back. We protect ourselves and the people we love. Like how you protected us from Uncle Mike. Exactly like that. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad you're a good knight, Dad. Blake hugged his son, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or justice. Tyler was safe, their life was stable, and the future looked bright. 3 weeks later, Blake received final confirmation that Mike's legal challenges had failed. His motion to withdraw the guilty plea was denied. His request for a new trial was rejected, and his sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Patricia Vance called Blake with the details. Mike received 35 years without possibility of parole. The judge specifically cited his attempts to blame innocent parties for his own crimes as evidence of his continued criminal mindset. Blake felt no satisfaction in Mike's lengthy sentence, only relief that the threat to his family was permanently resolved. Patricia, thank you for providing him with competent representation. Blake, you should know that Mike asked me to give you a message. He said to tell you that he understands now why they called you the Iceman. Blake smiled grimly. Mike had finally realized that Blake Morrison didn't just defeat his enemies. He dismantled them completely. 6 months later, Blake stood in his backyard watching Tyler play soccer with friends from school. Their life had settled into a comfortable routine without Diana or Mike, and Tyler was thriving in his new environment. Carmen approached from the house, carrying a beer and wearing a rare smile. Good news, she said. Meridian Industries just recommended us to their parent company. We're looking at a $50 million contract. Blake accepted the beer, savoring the cold liquid and the warm afternoon sun. Carmen, do you ever miss the old days? When it was just me, you, and Mike running a small security firm? Carmen considered the question seriously. Blake, I miss the simplicity, but I don't miss trusting people who didn't deserve it. Blake nodded, watching Tyler score a goal and celebrate with his friends. His son was happy, his business was thriving, and the threats to his family had been permanently eliminated. Some people might call Blake's response to betrayal excessive or ruthless. Blake preferred to think of it as thorough. Diana and Mike had learned that betraying Blake Morrison came with consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings or broken friendships. They discovered that some people could forgive betrayal, while others eliminated the people who betrayed them. Blake Morrison had never been the forgiving type, and he never would be. As the sun set over his backyard, Blake Morrison felt a deep contentment. His enemies were defeated, his son was safe, and his future was secure. It had been an expensive education for everyone involved, but some lessons were worth the cost. Tyler ran over, grass-stained and grinning. Dad, did you see my goal? I saw it, buddy. I'm proud of you. Blake hugged his son, knowing that Tyler would grow up understanding that loyalty was rewarded generously and betrayal was punished without mercy. Some traditions were worth preserving. Blake Morrison intended to pass this one on to his son. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.